The cut Americans pay a premium for, the ribeye, the prized center of the cow, is the exact cut a traditional French butcher would toss into a braising pot without a second thought. And the cut Argentinians have worshipped for generations is virtually unknown in Japanese butcher shops. There is no global consensus on the best steak, and the reason why tells you everything about culture, flavor, and the way different civilizations learn to honor an animal. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to look at your next meal completely differently. We're going to travel across 4 continents today, from the high-heat parrillas of Buenos Aires to the marble-tiled boucheries of Paris to the ultra-precise cutting rooms of Tokyo, and explore why the most prized cuts of meat are completely different depending on where you stand on Earth. And there's one cut, hiding in plain sight in most Western butcher shops, that the rest of the world considers almost sacred. We'll get to that. Let's start in the United States, because it's the reference point most of our viewers know. American beef culture is obsessed with the ribeye. High marbled, generously fatty, cut thick, it's the superstar of the steakhouse menu. The USDA grades beef on intramuscular fat, which is that gorgeous white webbing you see running through a good ribeye, and American consumers have been trained for decades to associate marbling with quality. It's a muscle that does relatively little work on the animal, which means it stays tender, it holds fat beautifully, and when you hit it with a screaming hot cast iron pan or a blazing wood-fired grill, that fat renders into something extraordinary, rich, beefy, almost buttery. Americans pay top dollar for this cut, and rightly so for what it delivers. But cross the Atlantic to France, and the conversation shifts completely. French butchery is one of the most sophisticated traditions in the world, and it operates on a fundamentally different philosophy. Where American butchery tends to cut across the muscle, thick steaks, clean slices, French butchery cuts along the muscle, following the natural seams of the animal. This seam butchery, called Boucherie Française, reveals cuts that most American consumers have never seen. The onglet, the bavette, the pois. These are cuts with deep, complex, almost mineral flavor, cuts that work hard on the animal and therefore develop incredible character. The onglet, which Americans call the hanger steak, is considered a butcher's secret in France, so prized that traditional bouchers kept it for themselves rather than sell it. It has a coarser grain, a more intense iron-forward flavor, and it responds beautifully to a quick hot sear and a rest with compound butter. And here's where it gets interesting. The ribeye? In many classic French preparations, it goes into a braise, not because it's inferior, but because French cuisine prizes different qualities. Texture, depth, the way fat breaks down slowly in wine and aromatics. It's a completely different definition of excellence. Now here's the pattern interrupt that should genuinely surprise you. Argentina, the country with arguably the deepest beef culture on the planet, where the average person consumes more beef per year than almost anywhere else in the world, their most celebrated cut is the asado de tira, short ribs, cut flanken style across the bone into long, thin strips, cooked low and slow directly over wood embers on a parrilla. There's no rushing in Argentinian asado. It's a ritual that lasts hours, a social ceremony. The cut they prize is connected, fatty, bone-in, chosen not just for flavor, but for the experience of cooking it. And what fascinates me about this is that in many American butcher shops, those same short ribs were historically a bargain cut, a cheap braise. Culture didn't just change the recipe, it changed the perceived value of the entire animal. And then there's Japan. Japanese beef culture, specifically Wagyu, operates in a category so distinct it barely resembles what the rest of the world calls beef. But set aside the A5 Wagyu for a moment and look at how Japanese butchers approach a standard animal. Japanese yakitori and yakiniku traditions prize thin cuts from the offal and secondary muscles, the tongue, the heart, the midriff skirt, grilled at high heat, dipped in tare sauce, eaten in small, precise bites. There's a reverence for each individual part of the animal. Nothing is beneath consideration. And the cuts that fetch the highest prices in Tokyo's yakiniku restaurants, the zabuton, the misuji, the ichibo, these are cuts that most Western butchers bundle into roasts or ground beef without a second thought. The zabuton, for example, is a small section of the chuck, an area Americans have traditionally treated as a braising muscle. In Japan, sliced thin, lightly marbled with the unique fat composition of a Wagyu animal, it becomes something transcendent. And here's the thing. That tells you it was never really about the cut. It was about what the culture decided to do with it. So why does this happen? Why do civilizations land on such different answers to the question of what the best piece of meat is? It comes down to 3 forces working together.
First, available breeds. Japanese Wagyu cattle have a fundamentally different fat distribution than Angus or Hereford cattle. The genetics make different cuts shine. Second, cooking technology. Argentina's open wood fire parrilla rewards long, connected cuts with bone. France's classical kitchen infrastructure, the brazier, the copper pan, the long afternoon, rewards patient, wine-soaked cooking. America's industrial grill culture rewards thick, self-basting steaks that can handle ferocious heat. Third, and most profoundly, scarcity and tradition. Whatever part of the animal was abundant, practical, and cooked with skill became prized.
Over generations, that elevated status became culture, became identity. Pitmaster's tip, and this one is worth writing down. The next time you want to serve something that genuinely surprises a dinner party, skip the ribeye and ask your butcher for a bavette or a hanger steak. Season it with nothing but flaky sea salt and cracked pepper. Sear it hard in a screaming hot cast iron pan for 2 minutes per side. Rest it for 5 full minutes, then slice it thinly against the grain. And I mean thinly, like a 1/4 inch, served with a classic French herb butter melted over the top. You will have cooked a cut that Parisian bouchers have been quietly treasuring for 2 centuries. And it will cost you less than half the price of a ribeye, while delivering a depth of flavor that'll genuinely shock your guests. The real lesson here isn't which country got it right. They all got it right, for their own context, their own animals, their own fire. What's incredible is that every single culture that developed a serious relationship with beef eventually found its own sacred cut, its own ceremony, its own answer to the question of excellence. There is no universal best steak. There's only the best steak for this place, this technique, this moment. And that means every time you explore a different tradition, you're getting a brand new answer. So here's what I want to know from you. What's a cut that you discovered late and now absolutely love? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. If this kind of deep dive into meat culture is your thing, hit subscribe because we do this every week. And next time, we're going inside the dry aging rooms of some of the world's finest steakhouses to find out exactly what happens to a prime cut over 45 days and why the funk is actually the point.